Many people cherish photos of those who have passed away. They keep them in picture frames, memory boxes, old albums, or even saved on their cell phones. But is there a limit to what we do with these images? Could we, without realizing it, be disrespecting the memory of these people, or even interfering with something deeper? This question, though it seems simple, has been a cause for concern in various spiritual traditions around the world. And when a man named Edgar Cayce began answering questions about life after death, this topic resurfaced with force. What he revealed about the use of photos of deceased individuals drew attention because of its seriousness and the consequences he described. And it's nothing like what most people imagine. That's why in this video you'll understand with clarity and respect what should never be done with photos of those who've departed, and why it can directly impact the soul of the departed, and yours as well. For decades, Cayce reported that images hold more than just memories. They can contain, according to him, a kind of subtle field that still connects to the energy of the person portrayed even after their death. This doesn't mean it's dangerous to have these photos in the house, but rather that certain uses or manipulations can open unnecessary channels, meddling with something that should already be at peace. He stated that the intention behind using the image is what defines the impact. Showing respect, love, and sincere longing is something natural, but playing around, exposing, ridiculing, or using these images for trivial purposes can, according to him, create a type of disturbance for both sides, the living and those who have passed on. Therefore, if you value content like this, which combines wisdom and reflection, subscribe to the channel now and give us a like. It helps us a lot to continue bringing important and enlightening topics to you. There's also a practice quite common nowadays that deserves special attention. Many people share photos of deceased loved ones on social media, sometimes accompanied by sincere tributes, but other times just as a way to attract attention or as part of virtual chain letters. According to Cayce, the problem isn't the tribute itself, but the superficiality with which it's often done. He said that turning the image of someone who has already passed into an object of public and decontextualized circulation could disrupt the resting process of that soul, especially if the image generates disrespectful comments, judgments, or mockery. Respect for the memory in this case goes beyond intention. It also involves the context and the care taken with the exposure. That's what we'll continue talking about next. In more profound accounts, Cayce suggested that the bond between image and spiritual energy is similar to what occurs in personal objects that were heavily used by the deceased. Just like a piece of jewelry, an article of clothing, or a handwritten letter, the photograph holds a unique vibration. He said that by handling these images lightly, people can end up reopening emotional or spiritual connections that were naturally dormant. This can generate strange sensations like intense nostalgia, disturbing dreams, or even feelings of guilt without apparent explanation. For him, this wasn't superstition, but rather the result of a subtle field of influence that still links the physical world to the spiritual one. Therefore, before posting a photo of a loved one or using it in public contexts, it's worth reflecting on the motive and the energy involved in that act. The image carries more than pixels or paper. It carries memory, energy, and, according to Cayce, even fragments of presence. Another important point in Cayce's readings is related to how these images are stored. He advised that photos of the deceased should be kept in places that convey peace, recollection, and respect, certainly not leaving them in tumultuous, messy environments or where there are frequent arguments. For him, the energy of the space directly influences the vibration of the image and, consequently, the possible connection to the memory of that person. This also includes avoiding storing these photos together with broken objects, old papers, or accumulated junk. According to Cayce, the energetic disorder of these environments could affect not only the memory of the deceased, but also the emotional well-being of those who live there. Thus, the guidance was clear. Create a small space of respect, where the memory is preserved with dignity, even if silently. This would ensure that the bond remains loving, but healthy. For those who have difficulty coping with grief, Cayce pointed out that excessive attachment to the image can become an obstacle. He wasn't saying to erase or forget loved ones, but to allow the farewell process to happen in a balanced way. When a person keeps many photos scattered around the house, looks at them several times a day, and talks to them as if the deceased were still physically present, this may indicate that something inside them is still stuck in the past. In these cases, according to Cayce, the continuous use of the image is no longer an emotional support, but an anchor that prevents the natural flow of life. The soul that has departed feels this attachment, and in some cases may even remain close out of compassion, making its own process of elevation more difficult. He recommended that love be maintained, but that attachment be transformed into prayer, serene longing, and gratitude. Based on these teachings, Cayce reinforced that the relationship with those who have departed should always be conducted with awareness. Photography, in this context, is a delicate bridge between two realities. Therefore, he advised that when looking at an image of someone deceased, the person cultivate feelings of peace, acceptance, and gratitude. Never revolt, unhealthy longing, or a desire to keep that presence tied to the physical plane. For him, the energy of the intention was directly reflected in the atmosphere of the home. That's why, incidentally, he warned that families in prolonged mourning should avoid constant gatherings around old photos as a way to fuel the pain. This didn't mean erasing history, but rather allowing the memory to occupy a noble place, not a space of continuous suffering. He said, "The best way to honor those who have departed is to live well, with dignity, and keep alive only the light they left behind." Another precaution recommended by Cayce was with the use of photos in amateur rituals or spiritual practices. He was clear in stating that the evocation of the deceased through images, without adequate knowledge or preparation, could generate undesirable consequences. According to him, not everyone is ready to open a connection with the spiritual world, and doing so without guidance can attract disharmonious energies. He compared this practice to the act of calling someone who is already on another journey and forcing them to look back. This not only delays the path of that soul, but can further confuse the feelings of those who are here. He recommended that if someone felt the need to connect spiritually with a loved one, the best way would be silent prayer, gratitude, and a sincere desire for peace for both. The photo in this case should only be a discreet symbol of love, not an open channel without direction. There's also a curious point that he addressed about small children who have frequent contact with photos of deceased relatives. Cayce said that the early years of life are marked by a very high spiritual sensitivity, and that images charged with emotion can directly influence the emotional field of these children. He wasn't saying to hide family history, but to dose the way it is presented. Telling who that person was with naturalness and affection is important, but filling the environment with images of people who have already died, without explanations, can cause emotional confusion or even fears without apparent reason. Cayce encouraged the creation of a positive but balanced memory, in which the child understands that death is part of life, and that those who have departed continue to exist in another way, in peace, and that now is the time to fully live the present. Another issue that many people ignore is the use of photos of the deceased in personalized items, such as t-shirts, mugs, or souvenirs distributed at wakes and death anniversaries. Cayce pointed out that, although the intention is to honor, the result can be the opposite when the image is trivialized or transformed into a consumer item. For him, this disrespects the natural cycle of life and death, as it traps the person's memory in objects of daily use without the proper space for recollection. Furthermore, he viewed with concern the repeated use of these images as a way to fuel the pain or the feeling of loss, especially when there is no real purpose of healing. He suggested that one choose a single representative image, which should be kept in a special place, without excessive exposure. Grief for him needed to be lived with sobriety, and the image preserved with reverence, not as a symbol of absence, but as a sign of gratitude and passage. In practice, this means observing more closely how we deal with the memory of those we love. If a photo causes pain every day, perhaps it needs to be put away for a while, until the heart is more serene to receive it. Cayce didn't propose an erasure of history, but a reconciliation with it. For him, death wasn't the end, but a transition. And like any transition, it required silence, respect, and acceptance. When we insist on holding on to someone's presence just because we don't want to say goodbye, we are, according to him, preventing the soul from following its path. The photograph, in this scenario, can become an instrument of attachment and not of remembrance. That's why he encouraged the practice of loving detachment, the one that liberates without forgetting. Keeping a photo with love is different from living attached to it. The first is healthy, the second is a burden for both. Cayce also spoke about dreams with loved ones, especially when these dreams came after long periods of contemplation of old photos. He said that in many cases, it wasn't just a manifestation of the subconscious, but an attempt at spiritual contact motivated by accumulated emotional energy. This wasn't in itself something negative, but rather a sign that the soul of the deceased still felt the call of the living person. If this call came from a balanced longing, the dream could be comforting. But if it came from suffering, guilt, or resistance to grief, the dream could be filled with anguish, fear, or confusion. Therefore, he reinforced, before sleeping, when looking at an image of someone who has departed, it's important to mentally visualize peace, thank them for the life shared, and wish from the bottom of the heart that this soul is free and well. This attitude, according to him, calms the bonds and harmonizes the planes. For many people, especially older ones, photos are a way to keep family history alive. They hold faces, moments, and affections that time insists on taking away. Cayce wasn't opposed to this. On the contrary, he valued the importance of roots, memory, and continuity between generations. What he drew attention to was the excess, the unconscious use, and the way these images were integrated into everyday life. He said that a well-kept photo can be a beacon of light, but a poorly placed photo can become a point of tension. Therefore, he encouraged that each image be seen as a link and not as an anchor. The past should inspire, not imprison. When we use photos to remember with lightness, they become bridges of affection. But when we insist on reliving the pain, they turn into mirrors of unresolved longing. The key lies in the balance between honoring the memory and living the present with fullness. This balance also involves choosing which photos to keep visible and which to store with more discretion. Cayce stated that there are images that carry more emotional force than others. Photos taken in moments of farewell, for example, or that refer to difficult periods of life, can keep alive an energy of suffering that, instead of comforting, reinforces sadness. He advised prioritizing cheerful images from good phases in which the person appears alive, full, and happy. This not only preserves the memory with affection, but also contributes to the person's memory being associated with moments of light. Keeping an image isn't just an aesthetic act, it's a symbolic gesture. It's like choosing which memory we want to nurture in our mind and in our heart. According to Cayce, this directly impacts not only our emotional state, but also the vibration of the environment where we live. Many families maintain true altars with photos of their deceased, surrounded by candles, flowers, and prayers. For Cayce, this can be healthy when done with sincerity, serenity, and spiritual purpose. However, he made an important caveat. These spaces shouldn't become centers of emotional dependence. He observed that, in some cases, people start visiting these altars daily as if they needed the constant presence of the loved one to continue living. This, he said, unbalances the grieving process and traps the departed soul in a kind of emotional influence zone from which it needs to break free. The altar, according to Cayce, should be a place of gratitude and of sending light, not a point of clamor or despair. When lighting a candle, one should mentally visualize liberation, peace, and continuity of life, both here and on the other side. This type of attitude strengthens the bonds of love without imprisoning anyone. With the advancement of technology, new ways of dealing with photos of those who have departed have emerged. Apps that animate static faces, simulate voices, or create videos based on old images have become popular. Although many see this as an exciting way to revive memories, Cayce would warn of the risks of this type of practice. According to him, artificially tampering with the image of a deceased person, trying to recreate their presence digitally, can interfere with the natural process of detachment. For Cayce, the soul needs to follow its path free of illusory bonds. Reviving mechanically expressions or movements of someone who has departed can be emotionally confusing, especially for more sensitive family members. The line between tribute and disturbance becomes thin when what is sought is not just to remember, but to recreate what is no longer here. Respect for the memory needs to go hand in hand with respect for the natural cycle of existence. In addition, Cayce drew attention to what he called the environment of permanence. It was the idea that certain images, when fixed in strategic places in the house, create an atmosphere that can influence the mood, sleep, and even the emotional health of the people who live there. He mentioned that photos of the deceased next to the bed, for example, could subtly affect the rest. This isn't for a mystical reason, but for the constant emotional evocation that these images provoke. The unconscious captures these stimuli and transforms them into recurring emotions, often difficult to identify. Thus, he suggested that strong images be positioned in places of passage, such as corridors or living rooms, where they could be seen with affection, but without occupying a space of constant centrality. Small changes in the organization of the environment can bring great emotional relief to those who are still dealing with grief. Another curious point cited by Cayce was about the ideal time to put away a photo of someone who has departed. He said that the time of grief is personal, but that there is a moment when the heart begins to accept, even if discreetly, the physical absence of that person. This is the moment when putting away the photo isn't forgetting, but recognizing that life needs to continue with new meanings. He suggested that this gesture be done with a small farewell ritual, a sincere prayer, words of gratitude, and the care of wrapping the image with respect as one who delivers something sacred to a safe place. For Cayce, storing a photo like this isn't abandonment, it's emotional maturity. The memory continues to live, but now occupies a space of lightness and not of weight. And it is in this lightness that, according to him, the soul of the deceased finds the freedom necessary to follow its journey without shackles. Even with all these recommendations, Cayce reinforced that there is no rigid rule or exact formula about what to do with the photos of those who have departed. What matters most of all is the intention and the emotional state of those who keep them. He said that each person carries their own time and way of dealing with loss, and that spirituality deeply respects this process. Photography on this path can be a tool of healing or of imprisonment, depending on how it is used. The important thing, according to him, is to observe whether that image brings peace or pain, whether it calms or disturbs, whether it inspires or paralyzes. This is the true thermometer. When the memory begins to weigh more than comfort, it's time to rethink the place of that photo in your life. This doesn't mean rupture, but transformation. It means giving a new meaning to the presence of that person in your memory, now in another form, more serene, more integrated into the flow of life. For many people, especially those who have spent decades alongside the deceased loved one, this transition can be the most difficult. Cayce recognized this challenge and advised that the process be done little by little, with love and without guilt. He said that no one needs to hide the photos or pretend that the pain doesn't exist. But it's important to perceive when the image no longer represents just longing, but an emotional refuge that prevents the present from flourishing. Keeping one or two visible photos which represent happy moments can be healthy, but turning the house into a memorial can keep the pain alive constantly. He believed that honoring the memory of those we love also involves continuing to live, opening space for new stories, new affections, and new possibilities. Life doesn't demand forgetting, but it asks for movement. And sometimes the first step is to reorganize the images that surround us. In the last years of his readings, Cayce began to address more frequently the importance of cultivating the symbolic presence of loved ones in everyday actions. Instead of clinging to photos, he suggested transforming the memory into actions, preparing a dish that the person liked, listening to a song that they loved, making a gesture of generosity inspired by something they valued. In this way, love continued to be active, but not stuck in the past. It was renewed in small actions, in conscious choices, in everyday gestures. This was, according to Cayce, the best way to keep alive the presence of those who have departed, not in static images, but in living attitudes. The image can rest, but love is expressed in the present. Thus, memory ceases to be an anchor and becomes a constant breath of inspiration, leading life with more meaning, more gentleness, and more connection with what really matters. In light of all this, the main lesson that Cayce left us about the photos of those who have departed is simple but profound. It's necessary to respect both the memory and the natural process of life. He didn't talk about fear, nor about harsh rules. He spoke of awareness, of balance, and of true love, the one that knows the time to welcome and the time to let go. The images we keep should reflect the best of those who have departed, without holding us back from what can no longer be changed. They should be sources of peace, not of suffering. They should remind us to live with more presence, with more gratitude, and with more emotional responsibility. After all, every time we look at an old photo, we are also looking inside ourselves, at all that has remained, at all that we have learned, and at what we are still ready to transform. Therefore, before deciding what to do with an image of someone who has departed, it's worth stopping for a moment and feeling. Does that photo uplift you or weigh you down? Does it strengthen you or exhaust you? Does it connect you with love or with pain? The answers to these questions are the best guide for any decision. Cayce said that true contact with the spiritual world doesn't happen through images, but through sincere intentions, elevated thoughts, and attitudes of compassion. And when there is true love, there is no need to force presence. Presence happens. It manifests itself in subtle ways, in dreams, in good memories, in unexpected signs of life. Photography, in this context, is just a bridge that must be well built, well cared for, and, when necessary, left in silence so that new landscapes can emerge on the other side. If this video has brought you clarity, peace, or has helped you in any way to see the topic with more balance, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving your comment. Sharing this content can help other people who are going through similar moments and who may not yet know how to deal with the memory of those they love. Our mission is precisely this: to offer a space for respectful reflection, where delicate topics can be treated with sensitivity and responsibility. Thank you for having accompanied us here. May every memory that you keep flourish in serenity, and may the love that you have lived continue to be a silent guide on your journey. May longing find its place, and may life follow with more lightness, meaning, and truth.